The garage smelled of hot metal and old rubber, the particular sourness of a machine that had not run in a very long time. The Lamborghini Miura sat under a wash of fluorescent light, its bodywork the color of dried blood, and it had not started in 4 months. Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Meridian Acquisitions, stood at the bay entrance in a cream blazer and looked at the man crouched beside the driver's door. "I don't know why we're paying a grease-stained nobody to stare at a car that doesn't run," she said loudly enough for the camera crew behind her to hear every word. She did not know that the man she was dismissing, Marcus Reeves, float mechanic, single father, owner of a 1,200-square-foot shop on the east side of Reno, had spent 3 years on the original Miura assembly line in Sant'Agata Bolognese, and that his name appeared in the ignition sequencing records of this exact prototype. Mia, his 7-year-old daughter, stood at the far edge of the bay holding a stuffed rabbit named Grease by one worn ear. She was watching her father, not the car. What happened next would cost Victoria Hale more than $3 million. Marcus Reeves had not always fixed other people's cars in a rented bay in Nevada. There had been a different life before this one, precise and exacting, conducted in a factory town in northern Italy, where the air tasted of machine oil and the winters came hard off the mountains. He had been 24 when he joined the Sant'Agata line as a junior assembly technician, and 31 when they gave him the ignition sequencing brief for the Miura prototype series. He had been good at it, the kind of good that does not announce itself. Claire had died on a Tuesday in March, 3 years after Mia was born. An arterial rupture, no warning, no negotiation. Marcus had stood in the hospital corridor holding Mia against his shoulder and understood with a clarity that felt almost chemical that he could not keep a life that required him to be in Italy while his daughter was in Nevada with a babysitter. He had come home. He had taken the bay. He had told himself it was enough. He did not yet know that the car sitting silent in Victoria Hale's climate-controlled showroom was the same prototype he had personally sequenced 11 years before. Hale had acquired the Miura at a private estate auction for $2.8 million, and it had not started once since delivery. 4 mechanics had tried. A specialist from Phoenix had billed $14,000 and left a report that explained nothing. When her operations director suggested Marcus Reeves, a name passed along by a parts supplier who had watched Marcus rebuild a Ferrari 250 engine in a single weekend, Hale had agreed with the impatience of someone who had already run out of better options. The morning Marcus arrived, Hale was standing in front of the camera crew she had hired to document her collection restoration series. She looked at his truck, at his toolbox, at the patch on his jacket, and delivered her line about the grease-stained nobody. The camera operator kept rolling. Then, on the second day, when Marcus had not yet spoken a word about what he had found, Hale told her assistant to inform him that if the car was not running by the end of the week, he was done. No payment for time already spent, no further engagement, no discussion. Her assistant delivered the message in front of the crew. Marcus nodded once without looking up. Ray Delgado, Marcus's one regular employee, a retired machinist with a hearing aid in his left ear and engine grease permanently worked into the lines of his knuckles, arrived each morning with a second toolbox and a thermos of bad coffee. He did not ask questions. That was the thing Marcus valued most about him. Day one, Marcus removed the engine access panel and spent 4 hours doing nothing but reading the car. No tools applied, just looking, listening, touching. Day two, he identified the problem. Not the fuel system, not the ignition coil, not the distributor, all of which the Phoenix specialist had replaced. The Miura prototype series used a priming sequence before ignition that was not documented in the service manual released to the public. It was a factory floor decision made during the final assembly phase, a workaround for a vapor lock tendency in the prototype carburetor variant. Marcus had been in the room when they made that decision. The laminated card he had taped inside the engine bay of every prototype that left the line was still there, faded to near illegibility, tucked behind the coolant reservoir. He touched it with one finger and said nothing. Day 3. Marcus executed the priming sequence, 12 steps, in order, without deviation. His hands remembered before his mind finished recalling. Ray stood at the rear of the car with a flashlight and called out pressure readings from a Fluke 771 clamp meter. At 11:47 in the evening, in an empty garage with the fluorescents humming overhead, the Lamborghini Miura started. The sound it made was not a roar. It was a low, even, authoritative note, the kind of sound that belongs to something built correctly. Ray set down his flashlight. Neither man spoke. The following morning, Hale arrived with the camera crew. She had not been informed the car was running. Marcus had simply left a message. It's done. She stood in the bay doorway and listened to the engine idle. Callum Briggs, an audio engineer Hale had hired for the documentary, who specialized in automotive acoustics, crouched near the exhaust with a Bruel and chair, type 2270, sound analyzer already running. He stood after 2 minutes and said, without drama, "That's a fully functional ignition cycle. Compression and timing are correct. This car is running exactly as the factory intended." Hale's prepared expression did not quite hold. Something shifted behind it. She looked at Marcus, who was wiping his hands on a shop rag and looking at the floor. "I'd like to discuss a contract," she said. Her voice had dropped a register, quieter than it had been in front of the cameras, more careful, carrying in it the particular quality of someone who has just understood something they should have understood much earlier. "For the rest of the collection." Marcus folded the shop rag. He looked up. He nodded once. That was all. Derek Solt had been COO of Hale Meridian for 6 years, and he had built his position on a specific skill, the management of information, not its creation, its arrangement. He was the kind of man who understood that a document filed in the wrong place is, functionally, a document that does not exist. Marcus had kept records, the same discipline he had carried from the factory floor in Sanagata, where every adjustment was logged with a timestamp and a technician's initials. Over the 3 days he had worked on the Miura, he had produced 11 pages of handwritten notes and a digital log uploaded to the shared folder Hale's team had given him access to. The log documented the priming sequence, the carburetor variant, the laminated factory card, and the specific vapor lock tendency that had defeated every previous attempt. Solt read the log on the morning after the car started. Then he moved it, not deleted, but moved, renamed, buried, 3 folders deep in an archive labeled Vendor Correspondence, Inactive. He drafted a memo to Hale's legal team suggesting that Marcus's undisclosed modification of the engine access sequence constituted unauthorized tampering, and that the company should review its liability exposure before honoring any further engagement. He did not know that the building's internal security system logged every file access event with a timestamp and a user ID. Marcus spent that evening in his own shop. Mia had fallen asleep on the couch in the back of fuzz, grease tucked under her chin. The shop smelled of solvent and the cold that came through the gap under the roll door. Marcus sat at his workbench and thought about the laminated card, about the men who had been in that room in Sanagata, about how a decision made in 20 minutes on a factory floor had outlasted most of the people who made it. Mia stirred and said, without fully waking, "Did you fix it, Dad?" He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "It's fixed." She settled back into the cushion and did not speak again. 3 days later, the building's facilities manager was asked by a different department to pull the security access logs for an unrelated audit. The logs showed Solt's user ID accessing Marcus's documentation folder at 6:14 in the morning and again at 6:31. And then a third access that corresponded precisely with the file's disappearance from the shared directory. The forensic review took 4 hours, conducted by the outside IT firm Hale used for compliance work. Its findings arrived in a 12-page report with timestamps highlighted in yellow. The report used the phrase non-disclosed relocation of vendor documentation with subsequent mischaracterization of origin. What the report established beyond the file manipulation was that Marcus's documentation was the only accurate technical record of the Miura prototype's ignition system in the company's possession. Solt had not buried a liability. He had buried the only evidence of competence. Hale read both documents, the report and Solt's memo, in her office with the door closed. And when she finally called Solt up in, the meeting lasted 11 minutes. The silence that followed it was the sound of a position collapsing. Hale looked at Marcus's unsigned contract sitting in a manila folder on her assistant's desk, and she understood, with a clarity she did not enjoy, that she had allowed the wrong person to shape her understanding of the right one. The car was still running. She had not yet signed the contract. Both of those facts were about to matter enormously. While that contract sat unsigned, Hale authorized the engagement of Carver Automotive Diagnostics, a Stuttgart-based specialist firm with a reputation built on European exotics and a client list that included 3 private museums. Their lead technician, Florian Metz, arrived with a team of 2 and a diagnostic suite that included a Bosch KTS 560 diagnostic interface and a snap-on Modus Edge scan tool. Metz was thorough. He was also working from the standard Miura service schematics, the same documents available to any qualified technician, the same documents that did not mention the prototype carburetor variant, the vapor lock tendency, or the priming sequence. He did not know to look for the laminated card. He did not know the card existed. Marcus, in his own shop 11 miles away, was replacing a clutch assembly on a Subaru Forester. He did not know what was happening in Hale's garage. Day 4 of Carver's engagement. Metz, confident in his standard schematic approach, adjusted the fuel delivery calibration to align with the production model specification. The prototype carburetor variant did not respond to production model calibration. It was not designed to. The vapor lock tendency returned. Day 7. The car would not start reliably. Day 9. Metz replaced the carburetor, not with a prototype specification unit, but with a production model unit, machined to fit. The engine ran briefly, then did not. Day 11. Florian Metz filed his report. The language was careful and professional, describing irreversible modification incompatibility and pre-existing structural fatigue in the prototype fuel system, with no mention of the 11 days of intervention that had produced the incompatibility. The report was 42 pages. The conclusion was 3 sentences. The Miura would not run again without an engine rebuild that Carver estimated at between $400,000 and $600,000, assuming prototype specification components could even be sourced. The car's insured value was $3.2 million. The gap between those two numbers was the sound of an investment unwinding. 3 investors who had been following the restoration series began asking questions through their attorneys. One, a private equity partner named Gerald Ashford, who had committed $200,000 to the collection fund, sent a formal letter of concern within 48 hours of the report's circulation. The camera crew had footage of the car running under Marcus's work. They also had footage of Metz's team working on it. The sequence was not ambiguous, and Ashford's letter said so plainly. Hale had moved too fast. She had always known this about herself, in the abstract, the way people know things about themselves that they have not yet paid for. Now she had paid. Ray Delgado found the document on a Wednesday, not by searching, but by being the kind of person who reads carefully. when everyone else has stopped looking. The Lamborghini archivist, Dr. Petra Vogel, had been engaged by Hale's legal team to provide historical documentation of the Miura prototype series for the insurance claim. Vogel worked out of the Santagata archive and communicated by email in precise, unhurried English. Her fourth transmission included a scanned folder of original assembly records, handwritten logs, sign-off sheets, sequencing briefs from the prototype production phase. Ray was in Marcus's shop when the email arrived, forwarded by Hale's assistant to Marcus as a courtesy. Marcus was under a Porsche 944 and did not see it. Ray opened it on the shop's old laptop beside the coffee maker and began reading the way he did everything, slowly, without rushing toward the conclusion. The ignition sequencing brief was on page 7, a single sheet handwritten in Italian with a diagram of the priming sequence in the upper right corner. At the bottom, in the space marked Technician of Record, there was a name. Ray read it aloud into the quiet of the shop, the words arriving flat and plain in the air between the workbenches. Marcus Reeves, dated 11 years prior. Ray set the laptop down. He picked up his coffee. Then he looked at Marcus's legs, visible beneath the Porsche, and said, "Hey, you need to come look at something." Marcus slid out from under the car. Ray turned the laptop toward him and did not say anything else. Marcus read the page. He read it again. He set the wrench on the workbench and looked at the screen for what felt like a long time. Mia was in the back office doing homework. Grease, sitting on the desk beside her pencil case. She did not know what was on the screen. She did not need to. Dr. Vogel's authentication arrived 4 days later in a formal letter on archive letterhead. The letter confirmed that the sequencing brief was an original document from the Miura prototype production series, that the technician of record named on the sheet had been the primary author of the ignition priming protocol, and that the protocol documented on the sheet was identical to the sequence used to start the car on the night Marcus Reeves had worked on it. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It was signed and notarized. Hale's legal team received the letter on a Friday morning. Hale was in a meeting when her assistant placed it on the conference table in front of her. She paused mid-sentence. She picked it up and read it while the other people in the room waited. The words she had prepared about liability, about unauthorized intervention, about the terms under which she might or might not honor the original engagement, did not come. She looked at her legal counsel. Her counsel looked at the letter. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Hale said quietly, "Apasta, get Marcus Reeves on the phone." It was not the voice she used in front of cameras. It was smaller than that, and more careful, and it carried in it the register of someone who has just understood something they should have understood much earlier. When Marcus answered, she said that she had been reviewing the documentation, that it was remarkable, and that she would like to discuss a formal consulting arrangement for the remainder of the collection. Marcus listened. He said he would think about it. He thanked her for calling. He set the phone down and looked at Ray, who raised his coffee cup slightly, the way men do when the moment is complete and no further words would improve it. The firewall plate was the size of a paperback novel, stamped aluminum, bolted behind the left front wheel arch where no one looked unless they already knew to look. Marcus had known. He crouched in the bay on the morning of the 9th day, a flashlight angled up into the wheel well, and read the plate the way a man reads a letter he has been expecting for a long time. The production batch code, the assembly team designation, a suffix the factory had used for only 11 weeks in the spring of the original build year. Marcus recognized it from a restoration apprenticeship outside Modena, where a senior technician named Borsetti had stood over his shoulder and explained in careful Italian that this particular batch had left the line with a priming sequence nobody had written into the service manual, a last-minute floor decision by a foreman who trusted his hands more than his paperwork. Borsetti had demonstrated it once. Marcus had watched, not knowing he was watching something that would matter 20 years later in a rented bay on the edge of a city that had nothing to do with Italy. Ray was behind him, saying nothing, holding a second flashlight. He had learned over the course of 9 days that Marcus's silences were not absences. They were the shape of thinking. Batch 7C, Marcus said finally, Borsetti's line. Ray did not know who Borsetti was. He did not ask. He watched Marcus stand and walk to the bench where the notes were spread, and watched Marcus's hand move across the page and underline something written on day 3, whose significance had not yet been clear. The priming sequence was 7 steps. It took 4 minutes. It existed nowhere in the documentation. When Marcus turned the key, the engine caught on the second rotation, settled into an idle that was rough for perhaps 8 seconds, and then smoothed into something that sounded to Ray like a question being answered. Ray sat down on an upturned crate and did not speak. Mia was there because it was a Saturday, and there was nowhere else for her to be. She sat on the workbench with grease in her lap, watching. She had watched a great deal over those days. She had learned the names of tools she had not known before. And she had learned that patience was not the same as waiting, not through instruction, but through observation of a person who embodied the thing. She looked at her father, then she looked at the car. "You just remembered something nobody wrote down," she said. Marcus looked at her. He did not correct her, because she was right, and because Claire had always said that children name things more accurately than adults do, once adults have stopped performing for each other. Marcus drove home in the dark, the van smelling of brake cleaner and the particular cold that settles into metal at the end of a long day. Grease was on the passenger seat, one ear folded, riding without complaint, as though the van and the dark and the smell of the work was simply the texture of belonging to this family. The house was quiet when he pulled into the drive. Mia's bedroom window was dark, but the garage light was on. The small fluorescent above the pegboard where Marcus kept the hand tools he used at home. The ones Claire had watched him hang one Sunday afternoon years ago, her coffee going cold on the bonnet of the car they had been restoring together, the one they never finished, the one that still sat under a canvas in the back corner. He had left the garage light on that morning without remembering it. He sat in the van for a moment before going in, not from exhaustion, though he was tired, from something quieter than exhaustion, the kind of stillness that comes when a thing has been completed and the mind has not yet found the next thing to reach for. He thought about Borsetti. He thought about a fluorescent hum in a room in Modena, and a young man who had not known he was learning something that would last. He thought about Claire, who had understood before he did that the real work of a life is not the work that gets recorded. It is the work that gets absorbed, the unhurried attention, the willingness to look at a thing until it tells you what it is. Mia was asleep on her side, one hand open, Grease already beside her on the bed. The nightlight made the room amber. She looked, as she always looked in sleep, like a person who had decided the world was trustworthy. Marcus stood in the doorway long enough to feel the weight of that, the faith it represented, the faith he was quietly trying to be worthy of. He did not wake her. He went back to the garage and turned the light off. The house was still. The tools hung in their shapes on the pegboard. Outside, the street was empty, and somewhere in the city, in a climate-controlled bay, a Lamborghini sat with its engine cooled and its history confirmed, waiting for whatever came next. The light was off now, but it had been on, and that, it turned out, was enough.